For a while now, I have wanted to start a video series that is dedicated to discussing the differences and the assumptions, things of that sort, between the adult science fiction fantasy section and the young adult science fiction fantasy section. Originally, I had wanted to start this series by discussing some of the common criticisms and misconceptions about both sections, and in my efforts to find some of these criticisms, I stumbled across an article, a blog post titled, "Why YA Books Suck." As a fan of both sections, I was very intrigued to see what this person had to say, and I have a feeling a lot of you are going to be interested in what this person has to say as well. All right, jumping in, we say, "Hey everybody, so I'd like to talk to you about why YA books haven't been involved in my reading as much more mature novels and classics have. I've constructed a short list. Feel free to prove me wrong in the comments. Also, I haven't read a YA book in about a year or two, but even at the time, I was already feeling negativity toward these novels." They go on to list their problems using numbers. So number 1, same plot, different characters. I've always noticed that the plots amongst YA books has been reciprocated into other novels. The Hunger Games, Divergent, and The Maze Runner all have a similar plot regarding the first of each series. All 3 consist of teenagers being manipulated by a form of authority, mostly the government, and eventually rebelling or escaping. There are dozens of similar novels. I think that it is very true that a lot of times when a book gets popular, there are other books that come out that end up having very similar plots, and that doesn't just happen in the YA section. It happens, I don't know, adult science fiction fantasy is very influenced by Lord of the Rings. But I digress. 2. Authors are living their teenage fantasies. This came to my attention when John Green, or was it someone else, said that he was told that his books are his way of fulfilling his teenage fantasies. I realized this was true. Although Looking for Alaska is probably one of the best young adult novels I've read, Green did base it off of his experiences at an extremely similar school. I read this book about 4 years ago, and at first I didn't realize that the novel could just be Green reliving his fantasies once he got older. Authors basing their stories off of their own personal life experiences? How dare they? In college, I had to read this book called The Immigrant, and it was about this young man who was living in the US illegally as a child and constantly in fear of being deported, and had to work in the fields picking strawberries, and had a really hard time trying to go to school consistently and things of that sort. And this was his life story, which he really shouldn't use for his own books. It's just so unacceptable. By the way, I like how they didn't say that maybe if it was John Green, they can't remember. They didn't say that John Green admitted that his books are a way of him fulfilling his teenage fantasies. It says that somebody told him that it was his way of fulfilling his teenage fantasies. So it's just somebody had an opinion, and then this person's like, I've decided that that opinion is very true, and it's fact, and it's true of all YA books. I'm gonna say here right now that Brandon Sanderson, he's not actually original. It's that he somehow was teleported into different worlds, and so that is where he's gotten the inspiration for all of his stories. So take that opinion and just believe it. Getting back to the article though, with point number 3, there's a lot of Twilight knockoffs. Not really sure how that's different from point number 1, but okay. Ever since Twilight was published, there has been an increase in supernatural romances. Vampires were already getting a lot of attention at the time because of shows like True Blood, but Twilight definitely sparked the niche in YA novels. There are countless novels with no originality because they focus on romance between humans and some sort of supernatural vampire, angel, or wolf. I won't even mention the cover knockoffs. I think that that's a very accurate point to make, that popular things influence a lot of the stories that come after. Again, because the irony, maybe this person's secretly brilliant, because to me the irony of talking about lack of originality when 2 of the points are exactly the same, they just listed different examples to prove the point, I think is hilarious. But regardless of whether it was intentional or not, again, Lord of the Rings most definitely influenced the books that came after, probably both, honestly, in the young adult and the adult sections. There are lots of stories that influence other stories, and that's true of any section. I don't understand how this is a criticism of YA books only. I also disagree with the idea that just because something shares a similar element to something popular means that it has no originality. I think there are plenty of times that a story has a chosen one trope, and it's still a different story than another story that has a chosen one trope. And in this case, just because there is something paranormal, I don't think that that means that all books that have paranormal love stories are exactly the same. Moving on to point number 4, which is lack of diversity. Being a Hispanic reader, I've noticed that as I read YA, most of the protagonists have been upper middle class white females. Although most novels really don't mention the character's race, the only people who can really relate to the characters are other teenage white suburban wealthy girls. So I'm confused. Because if they were exclusively talking about contemporary books, because they mentioned suburban, if they were only talking about contemporary books, maybe. I don't read a ton of contemporary, but earlier in the article they've listed a lot of times dystopian novels, and I'm assuming that they're kind of just referencing all YA books based off the fact that they are talking about John Green and his books, but then they're mentioning Divergent, so they're talking about a bunch of YA books, but I don't find in most of the science fiction fantasy I've read that our main characters are waking up in the morning and then they're pouring themselves a bowl of cereal and they look in the mirror and they're like, look how white I am. A lot of the times the stories that I've picked up, while I'm not saying that there isn't a lack of diversity, that's not what I'm saying at all, I don't understand the suburban point because that's not true. A lot of times in stories it's about overcoming adversity. It's about the fact that a group of people is oppressed, and it's about a lot of really serious stuff. I think there are so many examples. I'm not going to go list examples right now because there are so many. What have they read? What have they read that is the only thing they think exists? Also, at the beginning of this point they mention that they're Hispanic, and then they say that the only people who can relate are white, and I'm Hispanic. I'm half Cuban, but I obviously am very, very light-skinned, so not sure how those 2 points really go together. Also, sorry, this particular point is very frustrating to me because not that diversity is not important. It's most definitely important because every human being is different, and it's important that we show differences in stories, whether it's having to do with skin color or life experiences, or whether it has to do with difference in beliefs, whether it's religious or political. Just diversity in general is a great thing. But I'm really frustrated with this point because people can relate to something whether or not they look like the protagonist, whether or not they come from the exact same background as the protagonist. They can still find something to relate to. And I've picked up stories where the protagonists look nothing like me. Sometimes protagonists are guys, or sometimes they live in the slums, which is obviously not where I grew up. One of my favorite stories, Stormlight Archive, one of our main characters, who is pretty much my favorite male character ever, is a slave. I can't relate to being a slave, but there are so many things about that character that I can relate to, especially their struggle with their emotional issues. I hate saying issues, that's not what I mean. But the things that they're trying to overcome emotionally are so relatable. And that's relatable whether or not you happen to have dark eyes like that character has, whether or not you're a guy like that character has, and whether or not you happen to have been enslaved at some point. Like, just because I grew up in the place that I grew up doesn't mean that I can't find things to relate to with that character. And I happen to be mentioning something in the adult fantasy section, but that is true of lots of books. And so while I completely agree that there should be more diversity, and diversity is a good thing to have, I don't agree with this idea that you have to be a certain target audience to relate to anything, especially when there are so many great YA books that are tackling this very thing. They're tackling this very thing. Okay, getting back to the article. Their 5th point initially looks the same. It says lack of diversity again, but they clarify. This time I mean lack of diversity in authors. Looking through my collection of YA novels that I've acquired throughout the years, not that they've purchased any of them, how could they? Somebody just happened to have given it to them or something. I've noticed that a lot of authors are white. I give publishers props. There has been an increase in female writers, but where are the black writers, Hispanics, Asians? Walking through the Barnes & Noble YA corner, I only noticed a handful of obviously ethnic names. I'm sorry, I gotta stop for a second. Apparently, if you're black or Hispanic or Asian, but your last name isn't obviously ethnic, you don't count. The last sentence of that point is, I don't really want to make this a race thing, so I'll finish this point. And that's how they finished it. They didn't say anything after, they just put a period and that was it. I'm confused again, because what's the point of having all of this diversity in our authors if authors can't write their own personal experiences? I mean, John Green went to a school that was really similar to a school in the story, which is a personal life experience, but we don't want people writing those anyway. We want them writing things completely different and completely new and foreign to them. So why would we need diversity? I actually disagree with one of the things they said in that point. I agree with the fact that diversity of all kinds, again, is wonderful, and that it would be really great to have more authors represented because authors are going to have their own experiences, and therefore that's going to translate on the page, hopefully. But I don't agree with what they said about how publishers have been better about getting female authors, because if anything, the YA fantasy and science fiction section, or just YA section in general, is filled with female authors. If anything, I want more male protagonists and more male authors writing YA. I think that would be a great thing. And I know I already poked fun at it, but the point about, oh, there's only there's a handful that are obviously ethnic. Oh, I'm sorry that somebody's last name isn't obviously ethnic enough. That's so ridiculous to me. So, you know, if you're Black or you're Asian or you're Hispanic, your name has to be weird, just so you know. Oh my gosh. Okay, anyway, getting back to their last point, which is not challenging enough. So many YA books have basic vocabulary with a simple plot. I get that writers are writing for a younger audience, but teenagers need to be pushed to their full potential. Write about stories during historical events like the French Revolution, the Renaissance, Columbus's his trip to Central America. Use bigger words because reading is the only way I exercise my vocabulary. Schools don't put enough effort in expanding our vocabulary, so we need to be educated through books. Teach us, make us think, make us want to find the definition to that word. So as far as writing stuff in the French Revolution or the Renaissance or Columbus's trip to Central America, it's called historical fiction, and there are YA books that are historical fiction. Their concluding points, they say, that's why I think YA novels aren't worth the hype that they receive on social media, especially on BookTube. So many BookTubers are so YA-centric that the only types of videos they post are about YA novels. Oh no, somebody who likes books is talking about their favorite books, and those favorite books happen to be YA? How dare they? Why don't you use your social media power to help your viewers integrate other genres? Not saying all BookTubers, only some. Thanks for reading. Don't forget to comment, like, and share. Follow my blog for more posts like this, or maybe to see me get my butt kicked by fangirls. Well, that was fun. Let me know your thoughts to this article. Let me know what criticisms do you have of both the adult science fiction fantasy section and the YA section. What points did this person make that you totally agree with or that you totally disagree with? And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.